to Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Strait and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Talking Supply Chain. I'm your host, Brian Strait. Today, we're diving into a topic that sits at the intersection of supply chain strategy, performance, and financial resilience, an area that's becoming mission critical as companies navigate tariffs, inflation, geopolitical shifts, and the constant push to just do more with less. Of course, I'm talking about procurement and procurement spend. To help us unpack it today, I'm joined by Dave Panino, CEO of LogicSource, a company known for smarter management of indirect and non-core spend, I should say. Dave, thanks for joining me. Great to talk to you again.
You as well. Thank you for the time.
I think this is your second time on the podcast. Apparently, now I've been doing this long enough that people are now appearing a second and a third time. So, congrats on being a second time guest, I guess, if you will.
Well, thank you for having me back. I had a lot of fun last year, so it's been exciting leading up to this to know I'd be speaking with you again today.
Great. To get things started, there are people who may not have listened to us the first time. So, can you start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about LogicSource and what you guys do out there?
Sure, sure. Look, background on me. I'm um, grew up in Connecticut, lived down in Charleston, South Carolina, with my wife and four kids, and I've been in professional services my entire career. I started Logic Source in 2009. After a long career in what I'd lovingly call the advice business, a lot of different consulting firms, and I wanted to get into something more execution based where we actually rolled our sleeves up and did work, and that's what we started in 2009. And fast forward 17 years later, we now run one of the largest sourcing and procurement as a service businesses out there. We are the experts of, depending on your industry, indirect, non-medical surgical procurement, goods not for resale. They all call it something different, but we major in helping our clients drive material efficiencies in buying all the stuff that isn't for sale. In other words, indirect.
Yep. I love the advice business rather than consulting. That's perhaps anybody listening out there in the consulting industry might want to reframe yourself as the advice business. Sounds so much more helpful sometimes.
Yeah, it was a long career, but I had too many executives say thank you for the multi-million-dollar PowerPoint. Do you actually do anything? And I wanted to get more on the side of like I said, dirty fingernails and actually doing work, and that's what we do here.
Yeah. We're going to dive into some of the challenges and trends around procurement at the moment, but
Yeah.
want to start with a couple of kind of broad-based picture questions on the space. So, as everybody knows, right, we're in another period of volatility. We've got tariffs discussions going on almost daily. A lot of global instability right now. So, from your customer standpoint and your clients, how is this being framed? How is the current environment being framed for them? And what do you see as the biggest risks that they may be facing right now that maybe they're not focused on?
Yeah, I think the major challenge that we deal almost exclusively with CFOs and supply chain leaders, and I think the uncertainty and the constant kind of sand shifting beneath their feet is the single biggest challenge. As you
Mhm.
said with your opening, I mean, tariffs are in, they're out, they're up, they're down, and I think just not knowing. I think executives are pretty good at managing headwinds, but they need to be somewhat consistent headwinds. And these have
Yeah.
just been ever shifting. And I think that's the single biggest challenge that clients are facing. I think what a lot of them are starting to worry about is consumer confidence. And the market has been, pretty strong. Consumer spending has been strong. And I think there's concerns that weakens eventually with how much uncertainty, especially here in the United States, we're seeing. So everybody, needs to focus on this, and everybody needs to save money. I think it also depends on industry. We do an awful lot in consumer, retail, consumer packaged goods, and I think those folks are wondering where the consumer's head will be in 2026. Last year, we have a lot of high end, we have mid range, and we have discount retail clients. I think high end and discount were pretty strong last year, and it was the middle of the market that suffered. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like in 26. We have a massive healthcare business, and healthcare has got a whole different set of challenges because they, especially health systems, they can't raise price. So,
Yeah.
our retail and CPG clients, if they get faced with tariffs and things of that nature, they can adjust pricing. And in the past, the consumer has paid. You can't do that in the health system space. So you have to find the money somewhere else, or you have to cut services, ratios of nurses and doctors to patients, et cetera. So I'd say that's the most alarming area that as an American and as a consumer of health services, I worry for my family and I on how our health systems are going to survive this.
Yeah, you mentioned prices going up. A lot of organizations, they start to feel margin pressure and they need to improve EBITDA. And so the natural inclination for organizations that need to do that is like cut costs, right? So procurement becomes this area you can quickly go to and say, hey, we need to cut costs, source stuff cheaper, don't buy it, don't spend as much, et cetera. The the tariffs, though, I think have added a different perspective that because it's a rapid kind of thing, and we don't know the impacts. And I know I read an analysis last week that, or recently, I should say, about I don't know, there was 79 tariff announcements, and only 26 or something had actually gone into effect at this point. So
Exactly.
I don't know if that true this number is true. It was I forget I read it at McKinsey or somebody that had done this or Bloomberg, I think. So I guess the question is where does procurement fit into that space right now? Is it become an even more strategic thing? How do you guys how do they approach? How should they be approaching this thinking as not just a cost lever, I guess, but as a strategic partner to business, if you will?
I think that's it, right? Is it, if I go back and kind of date myself, right? I grew up in the IT industry. I worked for Gartner, and I think about when I first started my career, there was no CIO, there was no
Mhm.
CTO, there was an MIS director. They pushed around an AV cart. They had screwdrivers in their pocket and they fixed Xerox machines. And when you went to work, they pressed down and went to the data center. Everybody else pressed up. And at some point, they put the screwdrivers in away and gave them to Xerox. They gave the data center to IBM, and they put a suit on, went upstairs, and started talking about cybersecurity and omni-channel and all these innovative issues. And they became the CIO, the CTO, and I think the same is true for procurement. There's a massive evolution going on with sourcing and procurement. It is now very important that organizations, big and small, have real professionals at the helm of ultimately how they spend money. And it's been an afterthought for so many organizations for so long. And I think those days of having the luxury to not really worry about who you're buying things from and how much you're paying, I think those days are gone for most industries. And I think you're going to see, and you are seeing, the sourcing and procurement leadership, the chief procurement officer, whatever the head of supply chain, get more and more powerful every year. But I'll tell you, I still see, and I was on a call earlier today where you've got an organization that spends several billion and indirect, and they only have a handful of people managing it, and it's irresponsible. So I think there's still a lot of room to grow for the procurement organization and how they're titled, where they report in the organization, how they're compensated, how many of them there are, and I think that the CFOs that are paying attention spend an awful lot of their time figuring out how to buttress that sourcing and procurement organization to make the company's money go further or the institution's money go further so they can weather these headwinds.
Dave, I don't know what organization you worked for, but I can tell you that nobody ever came around and fixed our Xerox machine.
Go
We were just told, go use a different one.
use a different one.
Go use a different one.
Yeah. Remember
But
when they used to be in like every room on every, it's unbelievable. I think we have one in this building.
um, yes, times have changed, obviously. Sticking with you referenced room to grow from procurement, right? Mm, Volatility. I think when we went through COVID, which is what now almost 6 years ago, believe it or
Yeah.
not, um,
Unbelievable.
everybody said, "Hey, this is unusual. This level of volatility is highly unusual. We've never seen this before." It seems like every year since then, though, we're going through some sort of volatility moment, right? And and so I think we have to view volatility as being permanent at this point. We don't know what it's going to be, but there's going to be something. So from that perspective, for procurement leaders in general, as they deal with this permanent volatility, do they need to shift their mindset as to how they operate in an environment where they can't predict what's going to happen 6 months, a year from now, or never mind 3 or 4 years from now?
Absolutely. And I think, look, the single biggest challenge that we see in the market is tunnel visioned procurement leaders that are worried about kind of kingdom building and protecting the kingdom they already have. And I think the really progressive ones are the ones saying, I can't do all this myself. I can't do this within my four walls. I need third parties to help me. And when it's funny, I've done competitive analysis on our business about every 3 years, and for almost 17 years now, the answers remain the same. My single biggest competitor is in-house procurement, and the single biggest enabler to in-house procurement are the consultants. And it's the wrong answer. What in-house should embrace third parties that are execution based. They should embrace them to help them explain to their leadership that they need more people, they need more systems and tools, they need more resources. The consultants come in, charge a fortune. The bosses get real excited, but then nobody can afford to keep these consultants in long enough to actually deliver. So then you're left wanting. The procurement leaders have got to embrace execution-based outside talent who are bringing AI, who are bringing data from outside their four walls, bringing a supplier ecosystem from outside their four walls, and bringing ideas. Where are other companies mining for this gold of EBITDA enhancement, and how might we, in our organization, adopt those ideas and strategies? And again, I think the really progressive CPOs are constantly looking not just inward, but also outward on who else can help us, go bigger, save more, come up with more creative ideas, et cetera.
Yep. That's a nice transition because I wanted to shift into some of the actual execution component of this. Although if there are consultants listening, you're probably not thrilled with this,
Yeah,
but
I'll have somebody start my car for me tonight.
yeah. Um, so as we talk about strategy and actually working with indirect and non-core spending, when you talk about execution, it has to start with understanding what your costs are, right? So can you talk from an investment standpoint? What types of investments should organizations be doing? Are they making the right investments to really understand what these costs that they keep, you know, filing for, what what
That's a
what
great
they
question,
are?
Brian. I'd say that the thing that I remain staggered by, other than the fact that most procurement organizations are wildly underfunded, I'd
Mhm.
say the second thing that remain staggered by is the lack of visibility into spending contracts. And it's just the age-old cliche, you can't manage what you can't see. And organization after organization, big, small, public, private, non-for-profit, for-profit, being able to see, what do I buy? Who do I buy it from? Who buys it? Why do I buy it? How much do I pay for it? And is it contracted and under what terms? Is, you know, the absolute minimum ticket to the dance. And it's remains staggering to me how many companies haven't invested, to answer your question, in those analytics tools to be able to manage a living and breathing spend cube and contract management tool
Mhm.
set. So I think that's paramount. If you don't have visibility into your data, you're flying blind. It'd be, a pilot without, navigation tools. It's just crazy. So I think that's the single biggest place. I think AI is going to be a strategic investment decision right now. There's way more noise than value. But I think the cream is going to rise to the top, and you're going to see AI tools that are backed with really empirical data are going to win the game.
Yeah.
The technology is the easy part. It's the data that's the hard part.
Yeah. So then you mentioned the visibility and data. Are those among the biggest issues that you see for organizations that come with you guys the first time? And I got a second part of that question about the AI actually, and that is the ownership of indirect spend. I think a lot of organizations are putting AI in and maybe making the AI responsible for that. I don't know if that's the right approach, but Can you?
Yeah, no, and there's a couple things there. I think the yes, one of the biggest issues we see is data and visibility into the data. I'd say also in any organization there has to be a acknowledgement that we have a problem, that we
Mhm.
need to save money. And I can anybody who's ever if you interview 20,000 salespeople, they'll all tell you a story or 20 stories about the end of the year phone call, like, hey, I've got this budget, and if I don't use it, I'm going to lose it. Do you have anything you could sell me? That's madness. And that means that executives in large corporations are incented the wrong way. They're incented to spend all the money in their budget, or they're afraid they won't get it again next year. They should be incented to spend less money. They should make more money if they spend less money.
Yeah,
And it's just counterintuitive, but I think that realizing there's a problem, realizing we need to be efficient and save money, and getting a top-down mandate from the C-suite that we are going to, have to look at some sacred cows and make burgers.
yeah. That spending money because you have it in the budget is so true. And I've not worked in procurement, but I was responsible for doing budgets earlier in my life, and I am now too, of course. But years ago, I remember seeing my budget cut every year because I didn't spend all my freelance money that was budgeted that
Yeah.
year. And I go back to the publisher and like, well, why did it get cut? Well, you didn't spend it last year. It's like, well, did you want me to just spend it randomly just to spend it? Like that's a waste of money to me, right?
That's
But the
it.
result was because I didn't spend it, they determined I didn't need it the following year. And then something comes up and I needed the money and it wasn't there. And the result was that I learned, and this is obviously not good budgeting for any business, is I learned to make sure that my budget, knowing that it was going to get cut next year 10%, that I was 10% over what I was actually going to spend this year.
See, and that to me, that's a top-down challenge of creating a culture of efficiency. And and we see it every day, organizations that are um, from the CEO down, pushing and challenging how they can drive more efficiency, I think are going to be the winners. And
Yeah.
look, we have some clients who are, growing at a market leading rate. They're incredibly strong in their space and they're still frugal. So, those are the ones that I think win ultimately. And I think that's a top-down issue. And I see CPO and head of supply chain after head of supply chain that don't have their top executive support uniformly across the business to drive efficiency. So they're in sales mode. They're trying to influence people to let them help. And if you're a CPO or you're a chief supply chain officer and you're out, quote unquote, selling business owners to try to let your team help, that you have a top-down mandate problem.
Mhm. Yeah. It's an interesting way to look at it. Sticking with the visibility for the moment, you guys work obviously with a lot of companies, a lot of clients. Do you have an example that you can share where the improving visibility in the organization, that visibility of indirect spend, I should say, really unlocks some actual savings that they would not have found otherwise?
Absolutely. I mean, I can give a couple of examples. I mean, I think Tractor Supply, which has been an amazing client and an amazing journey for us. I think when their leader, Jen, took over procurement when she first joined, it was distributed within the business, and her partnership with her CFO and her executive team over the last 5 or 6 years is, dramatically increased spend under management going through procurement. And, we're talking, you know, 20% to 80% type of jump. And, the material economic gains that they're able to drive from an EBITDA perspective, have been industry leading. And I think it's everything the Tractor does, they do well. They constantly push and challenge, whether it's merchandising, hey, we sold that, tool, or we sold that wheelbarrow, or we sold that John Deere, unit last year. What are we going to sell this year? What's the reason for the customer to come back? And I think that's why they're so good and so powerful in their space. They have the same attitude about the indirect stuff. How could we negotiate better? How can we, get at more spend? And what's also cool about that is they do it in line with their culture, which is very entrepreneurial. So they
Yeah.
respect. business unit heads and let them go about their job without a really heavy hand. And they're a great example. I mean, in the retail space, Bath and Body, I mean, the leadership from Eva Barada, their CFO, driving, substantial efficiencies while, demanding, quality and service, are either maintained or improved. They've had material gains, and there's just a couple retail examples. But in the health system space, we see it every day at places like the Cleveland Clinic. They've got one of the best supply chains, the best supply chain in healthcare, and they've done hundreds of benchmarks this year just to guarantee they're at best of market pricing, and they're doing a hell of a job counteracting the headwinds of tariffs and inflationary increases. And so there's just countless examples of this across our
Yeah.
portfolio.
So as you talk about those examples and just thinking more broadly, from the technology side of this, right? The visibility of data, data accuracy, things like that that help. And we touched on AI earlier in the conversation, but is it AI? Are there other technologies out there that are really helping companies better understand and optimize their indirect spend? And I think most importantly, doing it in real time, right? And not historically saying, well, the last 6 months has not been good. We want to know now what's happening.
Yeah, I think that the data analytics tools are key, and they're getting better every day. The challenge is the data, the technology isn't the hard part.
Mhm.
The hard part is data. So, there's 100 spend visualization tools. That's not the hard part. But if you're so step one is making sure your spend is visible. But once you do that, you only buy what you buy. So you need visualization tools that are bringing data from outside your four walls, because you just can't see what everybody else is paying and that kind of stuff. So one of the things that we've prided ourselves on is we have over 200 billion of spend data running through our tools. So we can see what everybody else is paying, because of how big the business is and how many clients we have. So being able to see what, escalator maintenance in St. Paul, Minnesota should cost versus Orlando, Florida versus San Francisco is material to be able to negotiate. And that's just a micro example, but if you can do that across all of facilities, maintenance, repair, design, construction, marketing, IT, corporate services, logistics, and you can empower that by data from inside and outside your four walls, and you have enough data that you can slice it by geography, by industry, it gets really, really powerful. And again, the hard bit isn't building the tech. That's actually, compared to my .com days, shockingly fast and affordable. It's how do you get 200 billion plus of data? And it took us 17 years to do that and a couple $100 million of investment. So I think that's the winners and losers in AI and in analytics are going to be the ones that have data. The technology is just not the hard part.
Yeah. So speaking of the data, that 200 billion that you mentioned, I think a lot of companies, I mean, their entire trade associations built on the concept of peer group benchmarking, right? And you were just talking about this broad cross-industry data that you have. Can you kind of put that in context as compare that to a peer group benchmarking? Because if I'm, I mean, Tractor Supply, why would I not just compare myself against other retailers? What is there value in understanding what healthcare companies or what other
Yeah,
company
it's
other
a great question. Um, One, I think a lot of the peer group benchmarking are smoke and mirrors.
Mhm.
It's very hard to see their actual data. So you have to believe they're comparing you to somebody of like size and scale. Um, so I'm trying to be carefully choosing my words, but I don't believe a lot of them. I guess said directly. But there's unbelievable gains to be had looking cross industry. And healthcare has been a glowing example for me. Um, Especially non-for-profit health systems in this country, they get what I would coin wedding pricing. We all know the tent doesn't cost that much and the flowers don't cost that much, but your kid's getting married, so we're going to triple the price. Um, I have been stunned at what non-for-profit health systems are paying for the exact same things their public traded counterparts in retail, CPG, financial services, SaaS software, etc., are paying. I mean, the same stuff, and they're
Yeah.
not getting good pricing. Um, and I think it's because they don't have the sophisticated supply chain that and negotiation skills that some of these others have. So being able to compare cross industry is absolutely critical. And it's funny, I meet clients every day that are like, well, I'm a bank, so I want you to tell me all your banking clients. No, you don't. You want me to tell you how many times I've negotiated this spec of Microsoft, how many times I've done this Salesforce.com or this structural signage for a branch or a restaurant. What we're applying it to, which industry is irrelevant. It's indirect. It matters in direct. It doesn't matter in indirect. We're all buying the same stuff. So if I'm negotiating credit card processing, what does it matter if it's a hospital, a shoe store, a high-end, Italian designer, or a auto body shop? It's credit card processing. So we want to know what it should cost and the best price. We don't want to just compare ourselves to our peers. And I think it's a huge mistake companies make, just
Yeah.
comparing to the exact size, exact same company in their exact same industry, because you don't learn anything doing that.
And I guess that makes sense in that if your industry is, for lack of a better term right now, being taken advantage of by a supplier or suppliers, right? To supply whatever service or product you're getting. If you're only comparing yourself to other people in your space, they're also being taken advantage of. So you don't get the true understanding as to what people are actually paying for that service or product.
Absolutely.
That,
And look, I'm a believer in getting as much data as you possibly can. Our head of data always says to me, you want to torture the data until it talks.
yeah.
Getting as much data as you can to make an informed decision, I think, is absolutely critical. And I think looking at just one peer set um, is only giving you one dimension of a multi-dimension view.
So does that massive amount of data, that indirect spend data that you have, for clients, does that give them an advantage to be able to make decisions faster? Especially these days, right? Going back to the beginning, we're talking about volatility and how things can change. I'm guessing that because you have so much of it, you can see changes in pricing happen in real time.
Absolutely. And you can see that it's also beyond price, it's also terms.
Okay.
If you do, and it's a term you don't hear a lot in procurement, but you should hear it a lot in procurement, which is frequency, right? So we were with a prospective client last week that's in the middle of a massive Microsoft negotiation. The last time they've done a Microsoft negotiation was 4 years ago, and the person who did it has long gone. We're going to do 40 Microsoft negotiations in the month of February. So just being in the market that often, knowing what everybody else is paying, knowing what terms and conditions, payment terms, termination, all the things, you're going to get to a result much, much faster. You're going to save legal's time. You're going to save business stakeholders time. And by the way, this isn't always about saving money. If I go into an organization and I see they already have a best of market Microsoft in this example agreement, well then move the chains first down. We don't need to go renegotiate that because you already have a good program. And that, by the way, that happens a lot where we go into an organization and say, hey, that agreement's good. We don't need to do that one. Let's go do this one. And having that kind of intellectual property allows you to accelerate everything, decision making, focus areas, you know, supplier choice, all the things, legal, everything. It's absolutely paramount. And this is my beef with consultants. They don't buy anything and they don't do anything. So that everything's a snowflake. Every engagement, they're starting from scratch with, let's look at spec, volume, and price. Here's how much you should be able to save. We're looking at the data and saying, no, the data helps us light targets, to use a military analogy, and we know exactly where to go because it lights up when we see something over market.
Yeah. Yeah. Want to ask you a few questions left. I want to ask you about a couple of terms, if you will, and talk about them a little bit. One of them we hear a lot in supply chain and it is agility and resilience. Can you, in the context of procurement, does agility and resilience matter? What do they actually mean in the context of procurement? And what kind of capabilities do companies need to have if agility is an important concept that they have to adopt?
That's a great question, and I think to your point of COVID 6 years ago, I think this is what woke everybody up to this. You have to have the ability to move um, your spend around because it's like the old Mike Tyson quote: "Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face." I think that COVID woke us all up, and then the Ukraine war. I think every Porsche, Audi, Volkswagen's wiring harness was made in the Ukraine. So you had, this is a direct example, but you have somebody buying a $250,000 911 turbo and they can only get one key because they don't have enough of them coming out of a war-torn, country. So, whether it's COVID or a war or, think about was it the Baxter IV fluids plant that slid off a mountain during the hurricane in North Carolina. I think all these examples lately have shown everybody it's not just direct, but direct and indirect. You have to have an agile supply base. You have to be able to move spend around to a panel of suppliers that can meet your specifications, quality, and price in case something goes wrong. And I think the world keeps showing us things go wrong. And unfortunately, it took some of those horrible events to wake everybody up that this just isn't just a supply chain challenge. This is a procurement challenge as well. It's not just a direct challenge. It's an indirect challenge as well.
Yeah. Well, if things didn't keep going wrong, some of us wouldn't have jobs. So we're very happy about that.
Well, it's like police. If there's no crime, we wouldn't need any.
Wouldn't need it. The next thing I want to ask you, you've talked about this already to some extent, and I don't know that we need to go deep into AI and automation. I mean, I think everybody knows that AI and automation are changing the procurement landscape quite a lot. What I want to ask you about those, though, is as companies look to adopt AI or adopt automation technologies, what are the biggest opportunities and what are the biggest misconceptions that your clients or you're seeing from clients as they look to apply these tools to an indirect spend project?
Yeah, look, I think the single biggest opportunity with AI at the end of the day is a very, very fast search engine.
Yeah,
Um, and it's search, we all have to be a little bit afraid of what it's searching. Um, but it's a very, very fast search engine. So I think that there's a lot of hype around this, especially in procurement. Agentic, capability where you're going to have agents doing RFPs, and that's all very interesting. But what are they pulling from? The key to AI, in I'm unqualified to talk about it outside our industry, so I'll just say in procurement, is the data.
mhm,
Like I've said it a couple times today. The technology is not the hard part. The data is the hard part. So I think that any AI tools you're looking at, focus on the data. I think some of these offerings out there that, hey, we're going to have an agent that's going to build your RFP and go out and negotiate this entire thing for you. Good luck with that. I think business stakeholders want to be in the room. I think business stakeholders want to interact with people so they understand the business requirements, the cultural requirements. I think it's the same reason why a lot of offshore three bids in a cloud of dust type procurement organizations struggle um, outside of commoditized sourcing. If we're buying office supplies and laptops, we can do that with an agent, or we can do that with somebody in, Mumbai.
yeah,
You're negotiating with your advertising agency, or you're doing your ocean freight, or your trucking, and it's your critical product getting to the stores on time. You're dealing with snowstorms we all have dealt with all the last couple of weeks. You want people around with that stuff. So I think a lot of the promise of these magical tools that are going to take procurement out at the knees, I think, like we saw in the dot-com era, a lot of that will end up just being shelfware that never comes true. I think the key is find tools that are bringing you data you can't get.
yeah.
And I think that's the key.
Yeah. And that's that's keeping the human as part of this process, right? And I think to give a great example, when we think about it, I think of it from my own life actually, and that, I have pets, as a lot of people do, and many people probably out there do like I do, in that we automate our pet food deliveries with a company, right?
Yes.
And yet I continually keep running short of food for the pets, right? But the delivery comes the same time every month, but yet I keep running short. And so then we increase the total, because we don't have to think about it. We just wanted the food to come. and then we increased it. Then all of a sudden we had this surplus of food, right? Because we had too much. So it's like what we've learned over the time of the years of doing this is that we have to stay involved in this process. We can automate the shipment, but we still have to be involved and check. Hey, are we running short on food? Do we have enough food to get to the next shipment? Like that's the human component of these things too, right? When you add AI
Absolutely.
and whatnot.
Absolutely.
So
And I think so I think that's to your question. I think the winners and losers are gonna all are gonna bring data you can't get. I think that's it.
yeah.
You know.
So final question. I want to ask you, going back to the very beginning, because I like the idea of working in the advice business versus the consulting business. So, if I can ask you to put on your advice business hat for a moment, I know you might not want it, but if you were advising a CFO or a COO today, what what would your three recommendations be to them so that they can gain more control of their indirect spend, their resilience, their financial stability this year? What three pieces of advice would you suggest that they do?
I think the first thing they should do is a analysis of their investment in sourcing and procurement as a corollary to their spend under management. And I think what they will find jump off the page is that the headcount and the tools and the third parties that they're investing in on the direct side dwarf that which they are doing on the indirect side, and they're getting exactly what they deserve. Um, the Institute of Supply Chain Management or a Hackett would say you should spend about 1.2% of spend under management on your team in sourcing and procurement. Now, I will tell you, I've never actually seen one of those in the wild that spends 1.2%. Maybe Unilever, maybe P&G, I don't know. But most of the time I see zero point 0.2, 0.21, 0.22, nowhere near best in class. And I think that the first step is, again, realizing you have a problem. So I would say do a top-down analysis of what you buy in the aggregate and how much money and resource you have against it. And I think you're going to find that you're wildly underinvesting and therefore you're leaving a ton of money on the table. Get that investment up to zero point 0.6, zero point 0.7, zero point 0.8, and you're going to start to see material impact. I think the second piece of advice I would have is I'm stunned every day that these sourcing and procurement teams don't have a number. The sales organization has a number and a quota, and they make more money if they hit it. And sourcing and procurement organizations should have a number. One of my favorite CFOs, three-time client of mine, used to start every year with what would I need to believe to get X, 100 million in profit improvement. When we first met Lululemon, their CEO and CFO said, what would I need to believe to take out X million so that I could reinvest it in our men's fashion line? And those kinds of challenges that then turn into goals, that turn into compensation, are where the winners and losers are. So I would say to CFOs and C-level executives, if your sourcing and procurement organization doesn't have a number that came from you on a goal that they have to hit, and if they don't make more money if they hit it, you're getting exactly what you deserve.
Yeah. Well, some people maybe they want that. I don't know. Dave, thank you so much for taking some time today and sharing some of your insights on procurement in
Absolutely. I
this
really
space.
appreciate you having me back.
Quickly for listeners out there, maybe want to get in touch with Logic Source. What's the best avenue for them to do so?
Best way to get to us is just come to me directly, david.panino at logicsource.com, and I will get you in the right department with the right folks. I'll make it easy. Just come right to me.
There you go. Thank you so much again. Appreciate it and great having you.
Thank you. Appreciate your
Um,
time.
we are out of time. I want to thank my guest today, Dave Panino of Logic Source, for joining me today. And of course, all of you who took time out of your day to listen to us today. Greatly appreciate it. New episodes of Talking Supply Chain come out on Thursdays. You can find them on scmr.com or wherever you get your podcasts. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, I'm Brian Straight, and you've been listening to Talking Supply Chain. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.